Yes, Natasha. I was out playing cricket on the oval at the time, and we noticed these three craft hovering above the school, which was a bit unusual. They definitely weren't aircraft. And then after about 10 minutes, we saw one go down into an area behind our school called the Grange, where we used to do our cross-country runs. So being a little bit of a rebel, as I was at school, I was one of the first to run through and jump over the fence and arrive at the Grange, and it was on the ground in front of me. The other two girls had arrived before me, and one was hysterical, Tanya, and the other girl had fainted. So I just looked at it, and after a few minutes it just raised up above me, probably to about 12 feet, turned on its side and went zoom straight up into the air and disappeared almost instantly.
This is the Paranormal Search radio show and podcast, discussing unexplainable events that shape our extraordinary world.
1, fire!
Preston Dennett began investigating UFOs and the paranormal in 1986 when he discovered that his family, friends, and co-workers were having dramatic, unexplained encounters. Since then, he has interviewed hundreds of witnesses and investigated a wide variety of paranormal phenomena. He is a field investigator for the Mutual UFO Network, a ghost hunter, a paranormal researcher, and he's the author of many books and more than 100 articles on UFOs and the paranormal. His articles have appeared in numerous magazines, and his writing has been translated into several different languages. He has appeared on numerous radio and television programs. His research has been presented in many newspapers. He has taught classes on various paranormal subjects, and he lectures across the United States. Let us please welcome Preston Dennett. Preston, welcome to the show, sir.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Yeah.
And we've had a couple questions. I had one question for you. You said you wrote more than 30 books the last time I spoke with you.
Yeah, I'm just about there. 27 is the actual account, but I should have 2 coming out this year.
Okay, great.
So, yeah,
and,
right close to 3.
You had a pretty good background there, but tell us more about your background. When did you first develop an interest in UFOs, other than...
Yeah, I grew up skeptical of UFOs, did not believe in them, not one bit, and heard a report on the news. I remember vividly, this was mid-November 1986, about a sighting over Alaska. And it was a pretty major sighting, but the newscasters just kind of laughed about it and moved on to the next story. But it interested me enough to start asking people I knew, my family, my friends, my coworkers, what they thought about UFOs. And I got real bad news. I mean, this was not good news for me when I found out that my brother had seen a UFO, my sister-in-law, people at work, friends, they all had witnesses with them. It wasn't just them telling me, they saw something alone. So this caused a major shift in my worldview. Like I said, it was not good news. It was like being hit by a ton of bricks, really. Shifted me into high gear to try and find out what is going on here.
What was the very first book you ever wrote on this as time went on? And how old were you when you wrote your first book?
1986 is when I started, looking into UFOs. I was a very young man, 21 years old, and became a MUFON field investigator. Pretty soon on, I joined all the UFO groups, bought all the books I could find, subscribed to all the journals, and really started digging in and interviewing people. And let's see, my first book was published in 1996, so I had been researching for about 10 years before I wrote my first book.
Was that Not From Here, volumes 1 and 2, or just volume 1?
No, those came quite a bit later.
They came later.
Yeah, the Not From Your series is pretty new. There's 3 of them so far. I'm going to put out another one, hopefully this year. The first book, I think, was UFO Healings, which covered 100 cases of people who've had a physiological improvement as a result of a UFO encounter. So that was the first one. Second one was 1 in 40, followed by UFOs over Topanga Canyon. After that, I just didn't look back after that. Yeah.
So you've done quite a bit of research, and you've probably talked to thousands of people on this subject of schools. When you first started writing these books, and you researched all this, what would you say what would be the strangest cases you've ever researched?
Well, initially, I thought they were all really strange. But that's a question I'm often asked, and there are some sort of weird outlying cases. Let's see, one that comes to mind is a lady I've interviewed who is a counselor and a real estate agent, good witness, professional. And she described a really amazing encounter she had while riding her motorcycle through the Watchung Mountains in New Jersey. Late at night, it was an isolated road, and she crashed her motorcycle and bent up the Kickstarter. So she herself was okay, but the motorcycle, she couldn't start it. She was standing there on a pretty remote road in the middle of the night. She wasn't sure what she was going to do when these figures just showed up out of nowhere. She never saw a UFO. She saw, I think, what people would know as hybrids. They looked very much like grays, large dark eyes and bald, but actually looked very human looking. She couldn't tell whether they were wearing jumpsuits or not, but they just walked right up to her motorcycle, picked it up, and one of them bent down and started fixing it. She didn't see any tools or anything in their hands. She stood back because it was pretty shocking. These guys clearly weren't human. And took just a few moments. They stepped back and motioned her to get on the motorcycle, which she did. The Kickstarter was now fine. And she started that motorcycle and just sped off. She said she never looked back.
What did Mrs. Johnson have to play in this with a reptilian creature? How did that come to play in the book?
Well, this is interesting because that was at a time when there was a wave of sightings of, quote, little green men. Not far away from the Hopkinsville, Kentucky case, which occurred really around the same time. Yeah, that one, Evansville High School. It's a weird case. There was a group of teenagers who saw these little green men on the high school athletic field. And this is how it usually goes down in these cases. It's right over the playground or the school field there. And this was at night, which is probably the exception. Most of these cases take place during the day, usually while kids are at recess or at lunch. This group of kids saw these, I believe there was a group of them. They were just very short, 4 feet tall, webbed hands. They were glowing green and just running around the schoolyard. And it would be the kind of setting I might dismiss. So I actually don't have a whole lot of information on it that I wasn't able to locate, but what I was able to locate was other cases in that same area around the same time. So that, I think, provides a level of corroboration.
Well, and before they had the schoolyard sighting, they had UFOs the day before.
Yeah, exactly. Often these schoolyard sightings are not isolated cases. Sometimes they seem to be, but in many cases, like probably the most famous case at Rua, Zimbabwe, the Ariel Elementary School.
And that one's the most strangest case I've ever heard in many years.
Yeah, and I thought it was an isolated case. That was one case I knew about before I'd written the book, but I kept running into more.
Right. I did too. I did too until Ross, he heard an interview with you on another famous radio show, and that's how Ross found out about the book. We had no idea there were so many school cases with these things. And Preston, in your opinion, why do you think that they're visiting schools?
Well, I've certainly thought about this for a long time, because one thing, this is kind of a unique behavior for UFOs.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, normally they're very evasive. You can't just go outside and see a UFO anytime you want, certainly. But in some cases, they do put on displays as if they want to be seen. I would point to the Phoenix Lights, or various waves like Gulf Breeze, Hudson Valley Wave. So they do sometimes seem to want to show themselves. I think that's what's happening here. They're specifically targeting schools. This is not like a random flyby where people are outside and maybe they see a UFO.
Yes.
And I say that because these things approach from above or the distance and come right down over the school, usually at very low levels. I mean, we're talking a couple of 100 feet, often lower. And like I said, 30% of the cases, they're actually landing next to the school. Humanoids are seen.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that makes these cases unique is there's a large group of witnesses there. Yes, mostly children, but more than half the cases involve adult teachers as well.
I think they're not afraid of children as much as they would of adults.
Yeah, I think that you've hit on it exactly. I think there's, a lot of these children have never even heard of UFOs. You might argue that children aren't great witnesses because they're, impressionable, imaginative.
And they're more likely easier to deal with the aliens.
Yeah.
Yeah,
They have no prejudices at all, against someone who might look different.
Mm-hmm.
So my theory is that these UFOs, UFO occupants, are coming down and announcing their presence to a large group of people in a way that will sort of slide under the radar. Because kids aren't really often believed. They're not taken seriously. And yet they're very impressionable. They're very, they soak up knowledge like a sponge. And in many of these cases, these child witnesses say this encounter that they had as a kid is something that deeply impressed them, something they think about daily, something they remember for the rest of their lives. Sometimes it actually transforms their life. They become UFO researchers or scientists or involved in the UFO field in some capacity. So it's definitely having a huge effect on them. And I think the ETs are just trying to convince people of their presence, their reality. And that's been very effective. I think
Do you remember researcher Kathleen Hine?
Oh, yeah, Cynthia Hind. Yeah.
Yes, Cynthia, I'm sorry. She wrote, "One cannot help feeling that perhaps the children of Ariel were chosen for some special mission, and the UFO encounter, its effect are still being felt today."
Yeah. What's interesting about the Ariel case is ETs were seen. The UFO occupants came out and actually communicated with several of the children who all got very similar messages involving the destruction of our environment, pollution, technology, and this sort of thing. And some of them continued to have encounters, which does happen in some of these cases. So a simple playground sighting can lead to sort of a lifelong experience with these guys. And getting messages are not super common in these cases. But what I find interesting about the Ariel case is the messages the children got, the same messages adults are getting when they're taken on board a craft.
Yeah, that was very similar. They were told about cataclysmic events and everything.
Exactly.
Yeah. And for the listeners out there, what we're discussing, we're talking about the Ruwa, Zimbabwe case that I believe happened September 1994. For those of you out there listening and not sure what we're discussing, you might want to look that up on the internet. Ruwa, R-U-W-A, Zimbabwe, happened at the Ariel School, September 1994. Very interesting case.
Yeah, I honestly thought it was unique, but it sure isn't.
Is that school still around?
I don't know. I honestly could not answer that question.
Oh. Okay, Tony says it was.
Actually, they were, because at the end of the special we were watching, they visited it. The children, they had all the children as adults come back, and they interviewed them again as adults. And a lot of them still have the same stories. In fact, one of the teachers is now a headmistress, and she said she wished she would have believed the children back at the time when they seen these. She feels bad about not believing them at the time.
Yep. It's really quite unfortunate. That's what happened in the Broadhaven elementary school in Wales in 1977. There was 12 to 16 students who saw this UFO land. An occupant came out. They ran back to tell the teachers and weren't believed until they were separated and each of them drew what they had seen.
Yeah, there was an incident, I think it was in Florida. It has a really strange Indian, Native American name, something Florida. I can't remember.
Yeah, I know what case
you know what I'm talking about? Yeah, that's another famous one where the kids are running outside, and then the UFO was just hovering a few feet off the ground, and the kids were running out, and the teacher kept trying to get them back inside, and they kept looking out the window because they would appear and disappear.
200 students, by the way, and the teachers did leave statements. This was an incident that did occur actually over a period of 2 days. It was exactly 1 year after a very famous incident in Australia, by the way. But the Crestview Elementary School is what you're talking about here. April 1967, Opelika, Florida.
That's it.
And
Opelika.
200 students saw this, and teachers. These objects came right down, apparently landed at one point. There was multiple objects, silver. They're darting around, blinking, disappearing, reappearing. And it just, actually what happened was the military showed up. And this happens periodically in these cases.
Yeah, I'm surprised the military didn't seem to be very involved in the Zimbabwe case. I haven't heard. The only strange thing about that case was the psychiatrist, Mackey.
Yeah, John Mack.
He was supposedly, that's it, he was supposedly hit by a drunk driver in Africa after he interviewed these kids.
London.
Was it London?
London.
Oh, London. I'm sorry, London. And that sounded kind of a little off. Like, it just so happens he got hit by a drunk driver after he did all these interviews with these children, and they were talking about the UFOs and everything. But there haven't been any real strange Men in Black stories or anything about that particular case, or anything about military men coming after anybody to keep their mouth shut. Maybe you can share something maybe we don't know about here. It wasn't documented, or I don't know.
Yeah, as far as the Ariel case, no, there does not appear to be government involvement, but it certainly does happen. I remember there was a case at Jerome Elementary School, I believe it was. No, wait, let me think. I'm thinking of another one. Sacred Heart Elementary School, where one of the witnesses there was a police officer and had a camera that actually able to film this object as it moved away. It had been hovering over the schoolyard there. And he did get some visits from government agents who were very interested in this footage. And whenever you get physical evidence, that's when the government guys or the Men in Black show up. Yeah.
Well, here in Pennsylvania, we had a very interesting case that you put in your book, People's Elementary School. And that would be on page 155. That was a good one.
Yeah, that was a very strange one. I remember that one. What's interesting about that one is that relies on a single witness who was with her girlfriend, and the janitor called them over and took them downstairs, and apparently there was this UFO that he had covered, and was able to somehow, or it appeared down in the basement of this school. And what's really interesting is the witness did provide a drawing and a description of everything that happened. And there was a gray ET there. And her friend that she was with fell unconscious. Just does not remember seeing this happen. But let me see, that was May 1967. Yep. And the gray ET gave her a message and said, "We are here to remind you who you are." And she has no idea what that means. But it's definitely a very peculiar case, and not like most of the cases I think that are in this book. I'm not quite sure what to make of it, honestly.
Neither am I.
Verify it.
I don't know what he meant by that.
Yeah, neither does she. I think she would like to know. It's occasionally they do give messages. There was one lady I interviewed. I met her at Contact in the Desert at a UFO conference, and we started talking. And she talked about how she had an encounter at elementary school in Mentor, Ohio. This was in October 1964. She was 11 years old, and she and her friends saw this silver object just drop down out of the sky and land in the grove of trees next to the school, which is what they always do. And she said she got a message, a mental message that was very clear that said, "Remember this day." And then this thing just shot off like a bullet. And we never talked about it after that. Sometimes this does become the buzz of the school. Sometimes it's just not discussed at all. That seems to be what happened in this case. But she did remember it, and I think this points towards their agenda again of trying to convince people, kids, of their presence.
Have you had any other cases lately?
I'm still getting contacted. I was contacted by a guy in England who, this case is not in the book, and he said he had an encounter. I forget exactly where it was in England, but I have it in my notes. And he says he was out on the playground early morning when all playing stopped, and everyone looked up. What he thought was a plane at first, except it had no wings. And it had a porthole, and you could see someone looking out. And it was just hovering there. And everyone stopped and looked up at it. It stayed there for just a few moments and then darted off. So, again, I think these ETs are showing themselves on purpose. I really do.
You know what I heard years ago that, now I don't know how true this is, but it came from another investigator, that from what information he was gathering, that the aliens are mad at our government for not letting them know they exist. Have you ever heard that statement? Yes.
Apparently, there are rumors that ETs have approached our government. Supposedly there was a meeting in 1954 at Edwards Air Force Base with President Eisenhower and ETs, which sounds crazy, but if you look into this story, there's quite a bit of corroboration for it. Many researchers are taking it quite seriously. And the ETs asked us to disclose, and our government did not want to do it for fear of upsetting economy and religion and society in general. So I think what the ETs are doing is sort of a grassroots movement and showing themselves to individuals, small groups of people, and sometimes large groups of people when they can sort of get away with it. I mean, for example, this case was probably the most widely viewed that I could find regarding schoolyard encounters, and it occurred on May 17th, 1970 at Richmond School. This is in Maranui, New Zealand. And there was 400 students out on the playground. Suddenly, the teachers who were supervising noticed that nobody was playing. It was perfectly silent. And they look up, and there's this huge black object approaching the school. And it comes and hovers overhead, covering a good portion of the sky. It's totally silent. Got a kind of silvery, glistening surface. And everyone's just staring up at it for a good 5 or 10 minutes, at least. At which point it kind of turned up on its side and darted away. So this is clearly sort of brazen behavior. It's like they're putting on a publicity campaign, is what I think they're doing. And we're here.
Are you ever going to do another follow-up book on this kind of thing?
I might if I get enough new cases. I also know of another case that isn't in the book, which was forwarded to me by another researcher, and it occurred around the same time as the Rua, Zimbabwe case in 1994, but was in Colombia, South America. By the way, these cases are in Canada, all across the U.S., many in Mexico, Central America, South America, Africa, of course. There's cases in Spain, several in England. I think there's several in Australia, like the New Zealand case as well. This is all over the world. So yeah, I'm guessing I'm going to get a lot more cases. But one occurred in Bogota, Colombia, I believe it was, or somewhere in Colombia, at an elementary school, and was very much like the Rua, Zimbabwe case. The main teacher, who's sort of been interviewed about this, is very reluctant to have her name known, and has been very shy about being interviewed. But Ray Hernandez was able to get an interview from her, and she described how this craft landed next to the school. ETs came out, and many of the children and some of the teachers all saw this, but as often happens, it was kept quiet.
Well, those two girls we've heard a lot about on shows. They've been on TV when they were young. We were just watching them.
Salma Siddiq and Lucille Field.
Yeah. They seem to be the big speakers for that school for the children.
Yeah.
Yeah. And can you imagine? There was quite a number of people at that school who saw this. I believe there was like 200 children on the playground. At least 60 saw the craft.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm guessing there are a lot of people out there who aren't talking, and that the 100 cases I found in the book, really, that I put in the book, really represents just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, this seems to be like a small percentage, like you said. It's like almost like they won't be believed or something, or they keep.
Do you still have contact with them?
Some. Most of these cases, I wasn't able to interview the witnesses firsthand. I was able to track down a few myself personally.
Mm-hmm.
And I did try to reach out to some of the Rua, Zimbabwe witnesses, but wasn't able to talk to them. One lady I was able to talk to, her name is Melody Korn, from St. Louis, Missouri.
Huh.
She and her friends had a really incredible encounter at Point Elementary School in St. Louis, which is still there.
Yeah, that's in the book too.
Yeah, March 1966. It's an amazing case. She and I think it was 5 other friends decided they were just going to break away from the main playground there and go to the other side of the field and play tag. And they looked down and they saw these weird footprints in the sand there on the ground. And they were trying to figure out what they were because they were clearly bipedal, but they didn't look like anything that they could, think of. And that's when they noticed this light off in the trees. And their first thought was ice cream truck. They're little kids. And it was against the rules to go off school boundaries, but they were very curious and excited, and so they just went off and ran into the trees there and saw that this wasn't an ice cream truck at all. This was a craft of some kind, landed on the ground, it had little landing legs, had a bright light on top. She doesn't remember if there was any portholes or not. And her attention and her friend's attention was drawn away from the craft to this short figure standing actually quite close to them. And it wasn't human. It had very big eyes, and its face, she said, looked very strange, almost like a gorilla or something. And it looked very muscular. It was wearing some type of jumpsuit. And it was just staring right at them, staring them down. And as soon as they approached, they stopped. They were standing there in a row, and this thing just backed up and went into the craft. And at that point, the teacher approached, and she started ushering all the children back into the school, and Melody was in the classroom with all her classmates, and they were all rushing to the window and looking for this thing, because now it had the attention of all the kids. And they couldn't see the entity anymore, but they could still see this craft. And all the kids were ushered out of the classrooms and into the gymnasium. They cut school short, or closed the school down, which happens in some of these cases.
Wow.
And we're getting ready to send the children home when one of them shouted out, "There it goes!" Now, the gymnasium did have windows, but they were pretty high up. And one of the kids said he saw it dart away. And
another interesting thing that you had written that I can't find a book, it's not in the UFO Encounters book, is UFOs over drive-in movies.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Right? That's kind of, in a weird way, a follow-up to this book. Because I started looking for other areas that are what I would call UFO attractors. Because it's clear to me that UFOs are targeting schools, and I'm wondering, well, what else are they targeting? Is there any other encounters like this? So I started looking at sporting events.
They wanted to watch a free movie, maybe.
Yeah, well, the fact is, they are targeting drive-in theaters. These are not random flybys. Again, they're coming down right over the movie screen, right next to it.
Wow.
And it's not just once or twice. I found over 100 cases. Just got another one literally yesterday. I am telling you, this is a thing. I had no idea, even though I had run across several cases and investigated one myself.
Do you think it could be... I'm sorry to interrupt, but do you think it could be because they're curious as what the heck we're staring at in this big screen?
Yeah, that was my first theory. Well, you know, these are very provocative images. It's a huge screen. It's a bright beam of light. You can see this thing from outer space.
And I'm wondering, I always thought these guys must be really curious about us as much as we are about them. I wonder what they think about our holidays, our movies, our entertainment, our economic system, and the children, of course, if they think they're little adults, and maybe that's why they're confronting them in schools and everything. There's so many things about, I think that intrigues them as much as we intrigue, as they intrigue us.
Yeah, I agree. They seem to be very interested in all things human, all things Earth.
Yeah.
They've been seen collecting plants of all kinds, flowers, animals, for that matter. Rabbits, pigs, cows, you name it. A case involving alligators. So they are collecting pretty much all the flora and fauna on our planet, and certainly are taking people on board as well. And not just a few, a lot. People used to think abductions were relatively rare, but surveys show that. The Roper poll, the Roper organization is a prominent survey organization, and they did a survey on UFO abductions and found that 1 in 50 people show the markers of being a UFO abductee.
Have you ever researched a case where the children were abducted and were brought back or not brought back at all?
Yeah, actually I have. In terms of children being abducted, if someone claims to have had contact, as an adult, it's one of the first questions I ask them is like, have you had any experiences as a child? And as a general rule, people are being taken on board a UFO. It occurs starting in early childhood, anywhere from age 4 to 7, 12, maybe in some cases.
Wow.
This is something children are facing, often alone, without any information, and sometimes without the support of their parents, who don't believe and think, oh, you're just having a nightmare. Usually people are returned as far as we can tell, but there are a few cases, no, people are not brought back.
Oh my God. I wonder why that is. Any thoughts on that? Why they're not brought back at all?
Well, I think it's hard to say whether this is a hostile act or not. I think in some cases it is. There's a very well-known case that took place in Australia to a young pilot by the name of Frederick Valentich.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. Hearing about that. Yeah.
Right? He had a UFO hovering over him. He was in touch with the control tower, and he's describing it. and it wasn't a plane, and next thing they know, he's gone and never seen from again.
I wonder sometimes if stories like this are a matter of choice between the abductees or the experiencers, whatever they call them these days.
Yeah, I think so. I did investigate one case personally, where a group of young men were out in the Palm Springs area, just at a cabin in a remote area, and one of them wandered off to take a hike and came back and said he had come upon a landed flying saucer. And I was like, "You're kidding, you're joking." He's like, "No, I'm totally serious." He described this incredible encounter. Said that there was 3 or 4 of these gray-type figures, or kind of like grays, but actually very much human-looking. He was invited on board. He said it was a very friendly experience. That it was very clean inside. It was a white, rounded room. Everything was white. Creatures wore white jumpsuits, and they just told him that they were studying this area, and that if he wanted to, he could come with them. And he declined. He said, "No, I don't want to." And they said, "Well, we're going to come back here next year on this day, and if you want to come, you're welcome to come."
Wow.
This was the story he told his friends.
So it seems that not all of these confrontations are hostile.
Oh, yeah. No, by no means.
Some of them are almost like they're edification purposes. Yeah, the world's going to be just like with the children of Ruwa and other such cases where they were trying to tell the individuals, children or adults, about some of the things that might happen if we don't soon, get our act together on this planet.
It's the number one message for sure.
Yeah.
People are taken on board. Probably the most likely thing to happen is being physically examined, which can be very scary, especially if you're, I don't know, you've never heard of anything like this. And people have a strong fear reaction to the unknown, but some don't react with a lot of fear, and they're treated differently. They aren't like perhaps paralyzed. Instead are taken to the engine room and shown how it works. And that's not unusual, I have to tell you. I've run across that fairly regularly. And many people are given messages of various kinds, which usually relate to the environment. The warnings against nuclear proliferation are very common. Advice on moving away from fossil fuels and finding alternative energy sources. That's another theme that certainly is brought up again and again. Healing, spiritual issues, this sort of thing. That's also very common.
You talk about the healing power of UFOs?
Yeah, that was one of the first things I started looking into when I became a researcher, because I had interviewed this lady who was diagnosed with a cyst in her fallopian tubes and had to get it removed, and it was causing all kinds of problems. And the night before surgery, she had an encounter, and she went to the hospital the next day to have surgery, and the doctors were like, "Well, we can't find your cyst. It's not showing up on the imaging. What happened?" And she denied that anything happened, and they said, "Well, we think you had surgery because there's fluid here in your fallopian tube, which is only present after you've had surgery." And she, of course, denied it, but her cyst was gone. And I knew that there were other healing cases in the literature. I didn't think there were many, but I knew of a couple of famous cases. There was a police officer in Texas who was struck by a beam of light. He was healed. A doctor in France, he was healed of a axe wound on his foot, and also being struck by a beam of light. So yeah, that's how I started looking into this. Now, today, I've documented some 300 cases of people who had a physiological improvement as a result of UFO encounter.
Yeah, Ross, I was trying to get Ross to remember, there was a story about a guy who smoked a lot, and he was abducted by UFOs. And I don't remember the whole thing, but you told me that the aliens gave him a box full of a vial of, they were like test tubes full of this black, noxious liquid that came out of his lungs. They practically cured him.
Oh yeah, I remember.
So that's one of the curing things I've heard about too. But that amazes me how they do. They cure some people, and others they primarily maybe cause them more problems, psychological or physical?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all very hard to figure out because people are left with mental trauma, and in some cases, they are physically damaged. They do have injuries. One guy I interviewed, he has had encounters his whole life. He recently passed away, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
But as a child, he woke up one morning and his eyes were severely burned. And they had to rush him to the hospital. And they're like, well, did you look at a welder's light? What did you do last night? And he had no explanation for how his eyes could have gotten burned. And this happened twice. And as an adult, he was having missing time and, all kinds of the close-up UFO sightings, and started coming back with puncture wounds once his foot was broken. But at one point, he was diagnosed with cancer, and it was a tumor on his neck, and it was getting larger. And he had that surgery, and was scheduled for surgery. And about a week before surgery, he had an encounter. Woke up the next morning, and the tumor was gone. He went to the doctor anyway. The doctors were amazed.
Wow.
He was very upfront with them. He's like, I'm having encounters with ETs. They were like, wow, so they did
Sometimes
surgery.
wonder what hospital they worked out of.
Yeah, he gave me the name of the hospital. He sent me his medical records. This was a cancer hospital in Canada. And they did surgery anyway, and they couldn't find any cancer, but they had to remove some necrotic tissue.
Wow,
They
that's really crazy. Wow.
Yeah. They didn't write, cured by ETs. They just put, what did they do? Unexplained remission.
Yeah, that sounds about right. It's unexplained, all right. Do you think some of the things that happen to these abductees or experiencers or whatever, do you think that some of the injuries they actually encounter might just be accidental, that the aliens really didn't want to hurt them? They just didn't realize maybe they were generating too much radioactivity on the ship or something? Or I don't think a lot of these are intentional. Do you? These injuries?
No, I agree with you. Yeah, there was another case, Sergeant Charles Moody. It's a fairly well-known abduction case in the literature. And he fought these guys as they were taking him on board, and as a result, injured his back. The first thing they did when they got him on board is lay him down and healed his back. And he ended up getting over his fear and was actually treated very civilly. They showed him the engine room. They gave him all kinds of information, so they'd contact him again, told him they had bases. I believe it was on Earth. I'd have to look that up. But yeah, it's a very interesting case and speaks to exactly what you're talking about. I don't think they're trying to hurt people. I really don't think that's their agenda at all. I don't get any reports of what I would call just overt sadism or them trying to torture people and having fun with that. No. The worst I get is people have a painful examination, and sometimes it's usually gray type ETs don't seem to show a whole lot of compassion. That's not always the case. Often they do, and will relieve your pain or just put you unconscious.
Yeah, I know there were
in pain.
There are certain races that don't have any compassion for the humans when they just throw them down on the tables, they probe them, they do whatever, and the patients are, the experiencers are screaming at the top of their lungs, and they're not even taking that into consideration.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened to this guy I interviewed. I call him Gary. He doesn't want his real name used.
Well,
but he does not like the grade. I can tell you that. He's had some painful examinations with them.
Of all the schools issues that you've researched, and the ones on the drive-in theaters and so forth, have you ever heard of a child that was hurt or maybe even killed when they were confronted by these aliens?
No.
No? Oh, that's good, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, no. In most of these cases, the children don't react with fear. There's a few cases where it does cause a little bit of a panic, for sure. But generally speaking, no. No, in no cases of kids being injured that I could find.
Well, that's good. Because I think they have a natural compassion. I don't hear any stories about children being hurt or maimed or killed by the aliens, it always seems to be adults. Maybe it depends on how difficult they become on the ships. I don't know. But yeah, I never really heard of a story. But I don't know a lot about, like I didn't even know a lot of children were facing some of the things that you wrote about. And drive-in theaters, that really makes me laugh because I'm picturing this UFO sitting in front of this big screen and watching a film with everybody else, trying to figure out what is going on, you know.
Yeah, actually, I think they're just showing themselves off. I thought maybe they're there to watch the movie, but no,
are.
I don't think so.
They're missing out on the concession stand.
Yeah. Let's all go to the lobby, and they're all running out to the lobby.
Well, in your book, you also have something that's interesting to me, is Bigfoot, the Yeti, and other ape men. I had an encounter with a Bigfoot myself. And I've also been thinking, investigating these things. I have guys that do investigations for us. What's your take on this?
Yeah, I have looked into Bigfoot. I didn't want to, but I ran into a UFO case that actually involved Bigfoot. Some guy had a UFO land in his backyard, and the very next night, a Bigfoot showed up. I started looking into it, and Bigfoot. I suspected it was probably real because I had, by that point, heard many reports. But formally looking into it, yeah, I was pretty much shocked to see the amount of evidence there is. I think it's conclusive in the public arena. Someone objectively examines the evidence, I think they will come away convinced because it's overwhelming. I mean, it's all across the United States and the world. Cases stretch back over 100 years. Pennsylvania has a huge number of cases. It's one of the leading producers of Bigfoot reports. California is actually first. Washington and Oregon are also very strong. But yeah, it's all across the United States and the world. Goes by different names locally, but people describe the same sort of thing. An unknown primate.
Did you ever hear of any in the Harrisburg area? That's where we're from, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. So.
Oh, I'm sure if I looked it up, there would be cases. Yeah, because Pennsylvania's got a lot of activity.
Do you believe there might be any correlation between earthquakes, tsunamis, and especially earthquakes that might have something to do with aliens or underground aliens or bases or anything like that? Or giant machines that dig tunnels through the earth? We're always discovering these new tunnels and sinkholes appearing out of nowhere. Do you think that might be related to aliens or anything, or a conspiracy with the government or anything?
As far as ETs, the ET earthquake connection, people have tried to look into that because there are earth lights which can appear during earthquakes. Lights will come out of the ground just from seismic pressure. I actually did see that during the Northridge earthquake. Sheets of light coming out of the ground behind my house.
Oh, wow.
Insane. But and people have tried to link that to UFOs, but I'm going to say no, that's not linked. I think there are some cases where people will have sightings around times of earthquakes. And I'm guessing that ETs have the ability to sort of predict them and sense the energies before it snaps. So perhaps that's the connection. But I'm guessing we have more to do with earthquakes than the ETs due to things like oil drilling and fracking.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
This sort of thing definitely been linked to earthquakes.
That may have something to do with a lot of the tsunamis and stuff too. Maybe it's the Earth fighting back. It doesn't want us to hurt it any longer. It says the Earth itself has been described as a kind of a living thing, and it's retaliating. We're like fleas on a dog.
Yeah. It's gonna make sense. I mean,
yeah.
Do you happen to have any theories where you think these aliens may be from?
That's $1 million question.
Yeah, good question.
My guess, my assessment, let me put it that way, is that they are biological beings like us, just different. So they've got craft that appear on radar, they've been photographed, filmed, they leave landing traces, sometimes involving radiation readings that are far above normal. We've got metal fragment cases, we've got enough evidence to prove that they're here. We've got implant removal evidence at this point. I think that these guys are from other planets, other star systems. And as far as getting first-hand information of like where they actually come from, well, some experiencers have reported that ETs have told them that they come from places like Zeta Reticula. The Betty and Barney Hill case was the first to sort of break that news, but that's turned up in several other cases. But Orion, the name Cygnus, Andromeda, that's another whole galaxy, so I'm not sure how useful that information is, but usually ETs are very tight-lipped, very coy about where they come from. If people ask, they'll say something like, it's not important, or you wouldn't understand, or we come from a place you don't know about yet, or something along those lines.
They might be right. Huh.
So they just, we don't really know. To be perfectly honest, we don't know where they're coming from.
Well, I heard of a lot of eyewitness accounts of saucers coming from out of the water, like the oceans.
Yes. I got cases like that from the very beginning. Where I live is right near the Southern California coast, and turns out this stretch of water, sort of off Southern California, right off LA, really, the Santa Catalina Channel, the stretch of water between Catalina Island and the mainland, has an enormous amount of what I would call UFO activity, unidentified submersible objects. And these objects are seen diving into the water, they're seen coming out, sometimes both, floating on the surface, but often underneath. People up and down the coastline and all over Catalina Island and Rancho Palos Verdes, the peninsula there, have all seen this activity. It's very well known locally, and has been going on for about 100 years. Good high quality case pretty much every year since 1947.
Well, do you believe that there may be civilizations that have lived here for thousands of years in the oceans, under the Antarctic, in the deserts, and so on, under the ground, other than just being from outer space, that they may have had reinforcements down here long before man even walked, well, long before man was able to not climb trees anymore, started walking on two legs?
Yeah, I think that does make sense. There are some cases off the coast here involving hundreds of objects coming out of the water. So where are they all coming from? I mean, if there's not a base down there, there's a parking lot of these things. And yeah, they have been here for millennia. We know that, based on hieroglyphs in the Egyptian culture and petroglyphs from Native Americans, Middle Age paintings, Renaissance paintings. I mean, you can go up and down the line, and each culture has quite a bit of information about this, stretching back not hundreds of years, thousands in some cases. So yeah, I'm pretty much convinced that these guys have been around for a very long time, and we're just now becoming aware of it.
I think if they wanted to attack us, they would get us.
Exactly, yeah. I think that's one of the best arguments we have for that these guys are not hostile, because we know their technology outperforms ours at pretty much every level. Their vehicles can turn invisible. This has been verified by the military. They know this. There's cases from Blue Book, Project Blue Book, that show this, where objects have appeared on radar but were not visible. They came swooping down over, like, Colorado Springs Air Base. That happened twice. So they can turn at right angles. They can shoot across the sky at many thousands of miles per hour, or apparently, faster than light. Hard to say, but they are definitely far, far more advanced technologically. And the people I interview, that's really the only thing all witnesses agree upon. Whoever these guys are, they're very, very advanced. I don't think they're going to take over. They could have, if they wanted to, anytime. So.
I'm asking a big question. What do you think about disclosure in June?
I'm skeptical. I've been in this field a long time. There's always been, rumors that disclosure is on the horizon. But on the other hand, lately, this past couple of years, with the Pentagon saying that they have, quote, material from otherworldly vehicles. That's a direct quote coming from the Pentagon. That should be huge front page news. It sort of just slid under the radar there.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was maybe we will get some real disclosure. I know there are more and more documents being poured into the public arena. Not a lot of them are what I would call explosives or changing, world changing, paradigm changing.
Yeah.
But we'll see. I think disclosure is something that will happen. We do see more and more government officials of very high rank saying that this is real. We have senators, we have representatives, we have governors, presidents for that matter, have said that this is real. President Carter, he saw a UFO in Georgia, and Reagan too. So I don't know if it's going to be the U.S. that leads to disclosure or another country, but at some point this cannot be held back. I think our governments across the world and the military are neck deep in this subject. They are deeply, deeply involved. It's taken very seriously at very high levels. They know it's real. If Roswell is real, I think it is.
Oh, it is. Roswell's real.
Yeah, we have the craft and the bodies. And it's not just Roswell. I mean, there's Kecksburg, Pennsylvania. That was a pretty famous case.
Yeah, Stan Gordon, I know him real well.
Yeah, so I'm just saying, it's not just one or two cases of UFO crash retrievals. It's hundreds if you look into it.
I'll tell you a secret. My uncle was involved with the Roswell crash.
It's not a secret anymore.
At some point, that Roswell, we're going to see in the museum. Mark my words. We will.
It really happened. It really happened. And I think when they do disclosure, Roswell's going to be part of disclosure because Roswell's well known.
Exactly.
And I personally don't think people take it as hard when they talk about Roswell. Do you?
Right. No, I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's what's going to go down. The biggest mistake was the 24 hours before they acknowledged it didn't happen. So that kind of messed them up.
I was curious, what is the most rewarding part of doing what you do?
Oh, I would say it's helping people out. My first sort of goal when someone contacts me is to help them. And people contact me fairly often, and they're at the end of the rope. They need the information. But it's not unusual for people to start crying as they talk about what's happened to them because they haven't been able to find someone to talk to who takes it seriously. So that to me is the most rewarding part, knowing that I've helped people. I'm certainly not in this for the money or the fame. I write these books because finding out UFOs was for me a very traumatic experience. And I don't want anyone else to have to go through that. I think it's a very important subject. I don't think the UFOs are going to go away. I think we're going to see open official contact, in fact, at some point. And I think disclosure will happen. This subject has the potential to change the world, and is. I mean, we could solve the energy crisis, the economic crisis, the environmental crisis, if we just let this technology that we have in our possession out for the public use. So, yeah, I think that this is important work that all UFO researchers are doing, all paranormal researchers, shows like yours. People need to know this stuff.
Preston, do you want to tell our listeners where they can find you on the internet?
Yeah, sure. I appreciate that. Yeah, I do have a website. If you just Google my name, it should take you there. The actual address is PrestonDennett.weebly.com. Got all my books there, excerpts, and you can contact me through my website. If you've got a question, a comment, or a story to share. My books are available on Amazon and other online retailers or bookstores. And I do have more books coming up. I've got another book coming out about people's very close encounters, 25 true UFO encounters, and putting out another volume of the Not From Here series about the more unusual sort of outlying type of cases.
Right now, you have volume 1 and 2, right, of Not From Here. I was able to find those on Amazon and other.
Yeah, volume 3 as well.
Yep. Volume 3 too? Oh, okay.
Those are all on your homepage of the Weebly site.
Definitely read excerpts on all of them.
This has been a really fun experience.
Yeah, Preston, thank you so much. We had a blast talking to you.
Thank you for joining us this episode. If you would like to attend our monthly meetings, you may do so by visiting the Lower Paxton Municipal Building in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. We meet the second Wednesday of every month between the hours of 7 and 9 p.m. Please visit our Facebook page, that is Paranormal Search of Pennsylvania. There you will find links to our YouTube channel and website.